For those of you who don't know me, I am Michael Lenox. I'm one of the professors here. Any first years? Have any first years? All right, so you might see me in Q3 in teaching strategy. Any second years? A few second years. Anybody taking entrepreneurs taking action? Good to hear, good to hear. So Philip Summers and I and John Colley will be teaching that elective in Q3 as well. This is the first of what will hopefully be a tradition here of lunches in which it's an opportunity for you to hear about what we do as faculty when we're not in the classroom. I can't tell you how many times I have heard from family and friends who ask me, so what are you doing during the summer? You just kind of, do you have off? What do you do? Well, the fact of the matter is what we do when we're not in the classroom is we're often doing research. So the purpose of these sessions, once again, is to get some exposure to research and the like. Now, what I'd like to do today, I'm going to talk to you about a specific project. It's actually new research. I unfortunately don't have many results yet, but I think we have a lot we can talk about nonetheless. But before we do that, I actually wanted to take some time and talk a little bit about the Batten Institute. So I'm the executive director of the Batten Institute as well. Figured this is a nice opportunity to just give you a little more background about what we do at the Batten Institute. As far as format here, we have an hour. I'd like this in the tradition of Darden here to be a free-flowing conversation. So if you have questions at any time, please raise your hand, ask them right away. Let's not let me drone on for an hour here and then ask questions. Let's get those out right away. We are recording this, so if you do have a question, I'll call on you, and you just need to use the mic to ask your question so we can get that recorded. Okay? So first, a little bit about the Batten Institute here. Batten Institute was founded officially in 2000 from a very generous gift from Frank Batten. Actually, Frank Batten just recently passed away. He was the founder of the Weather Channel, among other properties, was the CEO of something called Landmark Communications, a very large media conglomerate. Our objective, our goal with the Batten Institute is nothing less to be the premier research institute on entrepreneurship and innovation. We have two primary audiences for the work that comes out of the Institute: business practitioners, but also public policy as well. And in particular, we have a perspective that looks at how entrepreneurship and innovation can address broader societal issues, societal goals, if you will. So traditionally, when people think about entrepreneurship and innovation, they think about economic growth, the vitality of businesses, and that clearly is part of our mandate and part of the thing we're interested in. But we also speak to issues like you'll see today around things like sustainability or healthcare and the like as well. I think by positioning this, just talk a little bit about strategy here for the Batten Institute. What we're trying to do is really leverage, I think, some of the core capabilities we have here at Darden, also some of the core capabilities at UVA as well, in terms of our Jeffersonian legacy, our proximity to DC and the like. So how are we going to achieve this? How do we achieve this? I always like to refer to this little pyramid here on the right, and let me just run through it real quick. At the base of what we do, kind of the core of what we do, there are research projects. So we facilitate research on a number of different topics that speak to entrepreneurship and innovation. We have a research grant program, so we provide grants to our faculty to help support the research that they do. This past year, we have 20 different grants that were allocated for close to $500,000. They vary from everything from looking at healthcare innovation. We have work looking at open innovation and the sourcing of open innovation, to work like you'll see today on green technology and innovation entrepreneurship in that space. We have a pool of research associates. These are full-time researchers that are within the Institute that help our faculty in their projects and also take on projects on their own as well. We have a very vibrant fellows program, so we have faculty and other scholars who come in from other universities who are sponsored as fellows, who come here sometimes for a period of time to do research and projects affiliated with us. You'll see here in a second, but we also have students who sometimes work with us who are interested in doing some research on a particular topic, and they will affiliate as well. And our output of these research projects is our intellectual capital. And that takes many different forms. We have faculty who are producing books. This past year, Jean Licca had a book called The Catalyst, based on some research she had done on organic growth in corporations. Sarah Sarasvathy had a book called Effectuation, which is based on kind of her philosophy and her insights into the entrepreneurial process. Ed Hess has a book on So You Want to Start Your Own Business, 8 Things You Need to Know. So a wide variety of books that we publish. We have articles, which is probably the main currency that faculty engage in, peer-reviewed articles that we have with our peers at other universities and the like. And you'll see some of that today. And then finally, we also generate reports. And you'll probably see more and more the Batten Institute having their own branded reports that come out that talk about topics of interest, once again, to both business practitioners and to policymakers. So on that base, we then have a series of initiatives. And this is an attempt by us to kind of coalesce around a series of topics that we have some expertise and some kind of critical mass, if you will, amongst the faculty and interest in. So the four main initiatives we have going on at the Batten Institute right now include organic growth and innovation. Once again, Gene Litka and others have been looking at how corporations generate growth through innovation, new product launches, and the like. We have a number of faculty who are interested in entrepreneurship in emerging markets. We have a fairly influential report that was written a few years ago by Peter Rodriguez and Elizabeth O'Halloran looking at angel investing in Latin America. We're looking to actually redo that report and release it in the next year. We also have faculty who are doing work in domestic emerging markets. Greg Fairchild in particular talks about things like urban renewal and rural development. And once again, how do we leverage entrepreneurship to help address those types of communities? We have work in sustainability and innovation. We're going to be obviously talking a lot more about that today, in particular with this one project I'm affiliated with. And then finally, we have faculty doing work around healthcare innovation, which obviously is a very timely topic now. The perspective, if you will, of the Batten Institute is thinking, how do we think about designing a healthcare system that actually allows for innovation to occur, not only within like pharmaceuticals and biotech, but even in terms of healthcare management, hospital management, and the like as well. Elizabeth Teisberg is really one of the leading experts on healthcare innovation. She's up on Capitol Hill all the time these days testifying about her insights there. The final piece of the puzzle, if you will, is our outreach. While it's the smallest piece on the pyramid there, it actually is probably the majority of the activity, if you will, of the Institute, where I think our real value added is. So we do a number of things to try to bring our insights out to the world. We hold conferences. So one to be aware of, jointly sponsored with the Entrepreneurship Program, we're going to have our first e-conference in November. We're inviting alumni and students and community members to come and spend 2 days where we explore a number of kind of hot issues in entrepreneurship and innovation. For our alumni, it's a lifelong learning opportunity. For the students, this might be your first exposure to some even the basics, so you want to be entrepreneur type knowledge there. We'll also have some panels and the like talking about some hot issues in entrepreneurship. We'll have a research conference. We're bringing in top academics here to Charlottesville in April. This will be kind of a traditional conference where research papers and the like will be presented. We also do a series of workshops. We're looking to form something called the Batten Innovators Council, where we bring together chief innovation officers from a variety of top firms to talk about what are the big issues they're facing. We have a student PhD workshop camp that we sponsor, seminar series, and the like. We also work very hard to kind of push this material out into the media. If you haven't checked out the Batten website lately, batteninstitute.org, worth seeing. We've got a Twitter account, Facebook. We're all social media, Web 2.0 tricked out these days. We have a new Batten Bulletin that kind of summarizes some of our latest work. And we also do some work with some public relations in terms of media placement and promotional materials as well. So that's my little spiel about Batten. Is there any questions about the Batten Institute and what we do, how you can get involved? All right, excellent. All right, well, let's dive in now to the topic of today. So I'm speaking about, once again, a specific research project, the title of which is Drivers of Green Tech Innovation and Entrepreneurship. This is research that is funded through the Batten Institute under our Sustainability and Innovation Initiative. The period here is looking like a multiple-year project that we just began again in June 2009. So unlike many research presentations you might see where we've got the results, we're going to give you the answer, today you're going to be hearing really the beginning stages of a research project. We'll talk a little bit about what we're doing, maybe an opportunity for all of you to even get involved as we go through the project. Not uncommon in academic research. We have a diverse broad-based team that is working on this project. Not only myself, Mary Margaret Frank, one of the accounting faculty, is involved. Jeff York, who is one of our PhDs, just recently received his PhD from Darden in management, is staying on for a year as a Darden researcher, Batten researcher, and he is heavily involved in the project. We have MBA students who are involved and have been involved. Alexander Boyd, who just graduated this past May, actually worked with us this summer before going off and starting his job. Rich Downing, second year, is heavily involved and doing a lot of great work for us. In fact, many of the charts I'm going to show at the beginning of the talk here today were gathered by Rich. We have faculty at other universities. It's not uncommon for faculty to actually work with faculty at other institutions. In fact, I was thinking about it. I think every single research project I've ever done has always had a faculty affiliate from another university involved with that project. So we're in particular working with the guy Ronnie Chatterjee, who is on the faculty at Duke and who's also applied to be a Batten Fellow with us. All right, so some background here. How many people have heard the term green tech, clean tech? Okay, great. So everybody's heard that. Can anybody want to define it for me? It's very hard to find a real solid definition here between the two. I throw up here the wikipedia.com definition because Wikipedia knows all. Knowledge-based products or services that improve operational performance, productivity, or efficiency while reducing costs, inputs, energy consumption, waste, or pollution. That's a mouthful there. Some people try to make a distinction between green tech and clean tech. The history of this is clean tech was adopted by a number of venture capitalists about 4 or 5 years ago. I don't think they wanted to go with the green because they felt it had some baggage associated with it. Since then, there's some debate about the two terms. There are some, like Kleiner Perkins, VC firm, who actually pushes the green tech label. Kosha Ventures tends to use green tech. I think it's not worth really the effort to try to define this too much or worry about whether it's green tech or clean tech in this space. Broadly speaking, we use the term to refer to a number of different sectors. This isn't necessarily an industry. I don't like to think of it as an industry. It's a number of different sectors here together that include things like renewable energy. So solar, wind, biofuels. A lot of people put alternative vehicles in there, so hybrids, electrics, fuel cells. Green building. So energy efficiency, maybe it's a new insulation product, maybe it's energy efficient lighting. They can all fit within this kind of green tech space. There is a robust area of research and work being done in the green chemistry field. How many people have heard of method as a cleaner? So there's one that they're trying to come up with new greener types of chemicals and cleaning and solvents and the like. And also another growing area is in water purification and filtration. I think it's something here in the U.S. we probably don't think about very much, but overseas there's a lot of interest in increasing and improving the technology around water purification and filtration, especially since there's many areas where there really isn't much potable water and you have to really deal with water as a constrained resource in those areas. So these are just some of the areas in which people are doing work, or some of the areas that people would put under the green tech label. This is a growing sector in terms of financial investment. So we have a couple data points here. The one on the left here is total global investment in clean energy. They define clean energy basically as renewables, so this doesn't actually include some of the other categories I just had on the last slide here. But even just limiting it that way, we're still talking about $155 billion invested in 2008, which is about a 5% increase over the previous year. So despite one of the worst economic downturns globally that we've ever seen, we've still seen a 5% increase in investment during that period into the renewable energy sector. In particular, I think it's useful to look at the venture capital industry. So this is VC investment since 2000 into U.S. companies. So this is just U.S. based here. What you see on the first column is a significant downturn in VC investment after 2000. Not surprising, the dot-com bubble burst. Significant amounts of venture capital had been put up into year 99 and 2000. That kind of came back to earth a little bit, but it's kind of rebounded slightly here into the upper 20 billion range or so the last few years. Next to that is what we see in energy technology. So starting in 2000, very, very little going into the energy technology sector, but by 2008, we see $3.4 billion going into the clean energy space there, up to, at least by this estimation, 11% of all venture capital investment. The latest numbers that I've seen suggest that it's up to about 15% of venture capital investment, and it's the second largest class behind biotech at this point. So this is a significant amount of money now going into the green tech, clean tech space. Just a few weeks ago, Kosha Ventures just announced a $1.1 billion fund that they raised to invest into the green technology space here. So not only is it a growing sector in terms of financial investment, it's also an important sector in terms, at least, of the way the governments are reacting to it. So if we look here to the left in terms of global clean tech stimuli, this is actually government money being funneled into the green tech sector in terms of billions here, you see the U.S. taking the lead, $66.6 billion. China not far behind with 46.8, and a number of other players putting significant amounts of money into this sector as well. As part of the American Reinvestment and Recovery Act passed in February, once again, $66.6 billion earmarked for programs in this arena. Includes everything from tax subsidies to direct grants to also loan guarantees for companies making investments into this space here. Now, in part, why are they doing this? Well, I think there's a number of reasons we see such interest amongst the government sector in supporting and growing this industry. First, concerns about global climate change and concerns about greenhouse gases in general. So this is a way for countries to make some progress, perhaps, on those major international issues. I think there's concerns about sourcing of traditional fossil fuels, oil and gas, in particular oil in the U.S. and getting that overseas and maybe some more disruptive economies. And then finally, we're in the middle of an economic recession, or at least we were. We're probably hopefully out of it now, turning the corner. But this is maybe a way for us to engender more economic growth and build new jobs and the like within the economy. If we look at where the stimuli money is going by sector, quite a bit of it is going to revamping electrical grid. This is global, by the way, so this parallels pretty closely to the U.S., but we see this in other countries as well. Attempts to upgrade the electrical grid, money to go to energy efficiency, often around heating and cooling systems in buildings and the like. Transportation getting some money, just general R&D in the sector, just supporting the R&D. And then, of course, renewable energies as well, about a quarter of the global money going to the sector. And just some more numbers from the U.S. $6 billion for renewable, $6.3 for clean energy grants at the state level, $20 billion in tax incentives for renewable and hybrids and energy efficiency. And you get a sense there of some of the programs that are being sponsored. Any questions so far? Okay. Not only do we see variance across countries and countries kind of competing to be the source of clean technology, we also see a lot of variance in state-level policies. So in the U.S., if we look across different states, we see some adopting, as we have here, grant programs for renewables. So you can see here that basically the three colors represent whether it's just a state program, whether it's by the utility or some mix there. And so you get a sense that some states have these grant programs.
How come Virginia's gray?
That means they don't have one, at least at the time of this data collected. So only the ones that are colored have programs in place. Rebate programs for people who make investments. Once again, Virginia is not colored there. And then tax incentives. Virginia is not doing too well in these three metrics. But the point being is there's a lot of variance. There's a lot of different types of strategies states are using to try to incentivize this industry. I think one of the interesting questions here, and you'll see this in the next slide, is that the rhetoric at least being adopted by a lot of the state governors and the like, and also by the heads of countries and the like, is that we want to be the centerpiece of the new green technology industry, right? And they also talk about that in terms of job creation. What isn't often very clear to me is what types of jobs and where in the value chain they're talking about creating those jobs. The rhetoric often suggests it's about the innovation side, right? We're going to be the new Silicon Valley here in Virginia of green technology. In fact, if you have seen, we actually have something called the Tobacco Grant, Tobacco Commission. Basically, after the lawsuits for tobacco brought by attorney generals, there was a big kind of windfall from the tobacco industry to these state governments. In Virginia, they've decided to take that money and reinvest in the tobacco growing regions of the state, which tend to be the southwest part of Virginia. And they're trying to invest in it to regrow those economies, create jobs and the like. Now, their solution to that is to create a series of research centers centered around renewable energy. So there's going to be one in Lynchburg around nuclear. You can debate whether nuclear is a renewable energy or not. One in Danville, which I think is going to be biofuels. One in Abington, which I think is solar. And I think one down by Wise, which is going to be wind. But they have a variety of these set up. The rhetoric, once again, is we're going to create the new Silicon Valley here in Southwest Virginia. You might tell from the tone of my voice, I'm a little skeptical about they really have thought this through completely here. So our questions, what we're interested in trying to attack here. First question, really just a descriptive question. Where is innovation and entrepreneurship taking place in this sector? There's a lot of data out there right now on where manufacturing is taking place, where installations are occurring, But those are different questions than where do you actually see the innovation taking place. And it may very well be that you have Silicon Valley entrepreneurs building new technology, innovating new technology, contracting out to Chinese manufacturers to install them in Germany, right? But as far as we can tell, there really hasn't been a concerted effort to really collect the data to characterize where exactly is innovation taking place. We're concerned about it both geographically, so once again, Silicon Valley or Virginia or China and the like, and also technically. So where do we see the most ferment around development of the technology? Is it perhaps solar thermal? Is it solar panels? Is it wind technology? Where exactly is this innovation taking place? Similarly, we're interested in entrepreneurship. So where are new businesses being created into this sector? And this relates to the second question here. I think a very important question both for business strategy and public policy is, are we seeing it be, in certain sectors, entrepreneurs who are driving the technology or established firms? Right? In wind, is it Clipper Wind, startup pursuing wind technology, or is it General Electric? Now, one could imagine this is going to vary by sector, and we could probably come up with some hypotheses why. Nuclear energy, probably not going to be advanced by two guys in their garage. Right? Might be a little scary to think of two guys in the garage playing around with nuclear reactors, right? So that might logically be large established companies. In other cases, it might very well be the proverbial two guys or two women in their garage coming up with ideas that are going to drive this industry. This can have big implications for policy. Take the bailout of General Motors. I think it was up to what, like $44 billion at the end there that they had put towards General Motors. Now, obviously, there was a lot of reasons why they were trying to bail out General Motors, but at least one of the reasons given was we're going to transform them into a leading green vehicle producer, right? They're going to produce energy-efficient, high fuel economy vehicles. One could make an argument, hence where I stand on this since I'm at a Center for Entrepreneurship. You could give that money maybe to a venture fund who could distribute it to 1,000 entrepreneurs who are all trying to come up with the next engine technology. And if I was going to place my bet, actually, whether General Motors or 1,000 entrepreneurs are going to really reinvent the auto industry, I'd actually put it on the entrepreneurs. But once again, it would be important to kind of know this, right? To kind of try to figure out where exactly is the innovation taking place in these various sectors. Actually, I forgot I animated the slide. All right. I'm a strategy guy, so I have to ask this type of question eventually, which is, well, how are firms strategically positioning themselves in these markets? What part of the value chain do they see themselves providing value and capturing value at the end of the day? Some of our early work where we're just kind of out there talking to some of the companies has revealed that in certain sectors, in particular wind, there are some that believe it won't be an intellectual property play. Right? So the traditional way we might think about these emerging industries is, once again, two guys in the garage, they're playing around with stuff, they come up with something wonderful, they patent that thing, maybe they license it out, maybe they grow the business, but the intellectual property that they create is going to be the source of their advantage and success. What was interesting is talking to, for example, General Electric. Their perspective is, you know, wind technology at this point is pretty well developed, actually. And in fact, most of the patents that have been developed around wind technology, like the turbines and the like, are in public use. So you don't even have to license it at this point. You can just freely use it. And that the real strategic position is the way you tie these windmills together into fields. And there's actually some issues here technologically about how you distribute loads and the like in these wind farms. And that's where GE is putting their effort, in the technology, the software and the like, to allow them to do that. And on top of that, they might have greater scale and marketing capabilities that they could capitalize at the end of the day. So once again, really interesting, important strategy question. Where do you basically make your money in this play? We've seen a lot of variance, which I think is interesting at this early stage. In solar, for example, there are vertically integrated players who are designing the technology themselves, building the panels, installing the panels, and operating them. And then there are others who are specializing in particular niches in the value chain in the solar industry. So really open question about where are firms positioned here. All right. So once again, you know, we definitely have a public policy lens with that we want to look at this work as well. Yes, question. Oh, wait. There we go. Well, they can't get you either way. I'm telling you, they're going to get on my case if I don't do this.
Before we go to this slide, those questions on the previous slide,
Sure.
just speak to the water industry, water purification industry, and those questions.
Yeah, I have to admit that we haven't looked very deeply at water yet. We started off with solar, we went to wind, we're doing some work on biofuels now. So just completely speaking without any real basis here, water strikes me as one that might actually be more entrepreneurial at the end of the day because of just what little I know about the technology in that sector. Though the real money might be putting in the large installations, right? The people who can build the large, maybe it's saltwater transfer into potable water at the end of the day. But I haven't looked into that one. Anybody else? Anybody else got thoughts on water?
Well, one thing that's different about water is it's hard to transport.
Absolutely.
You know, I view it like an illiquid asset. Whereas electricity, you can use the existing grid for a lot of innovation. You know, you're building something beyond that. So that's what I see as one difference. Well, I see that point, but I mean, I think that's one difference.
Yeah.
You know, you could need water in Arizona or parts of the desert. If it's not there, it's hard to get it there.
Well, this also relates to the next set of questions about policy. For a number of these technologies, there's huge infrastructure issues that matter here. So even for electric utilities or electrical usage, we still don't necessarily have the grid we need to be able to take wind farms in the Midwest and transport that electricity to the East Coast. Right? So there's challenges there in terms of leakage, if you will, of the electrons as they transfer. And so some of these things are going to require, at some level, some infrastructure built out to make them viable. The electric grid is one I think is really important because some of the smart grid technology, I think, makes some of the renewable technologies much more viable and powerful, in particular because of their distributed nature. So I always like to say, probably none of us are going to build a coal-fired power plant in our backyard. I don't expect any of you to be doing that. But we might put a solar panel on our roof, or we might put a wind turbine. The issue with the electrical grid is if you're producing wind and let's say you're using less than what you're actually producing, you want to be able to sell that back onto the grid. And likewise, if you're producing less, you want to buy back from the grid. It's not always the case. I don't think we can do it in Charlottesville where you can really do that well unless you upgrade the electrical grid to allow for those types of exchanges there. So once again, technology that could be better if we put the infrastructure investment. Fuel cells is a huge one. So most hydrogen fuel cells, we just don't have a hydrogen distribution system in the U.S. right now or anywhere right now. And so that technology to be viable requires some type of infrastructure investment to make hydrogen available to people to use for powering their vehicles. Any other questions? Okay. Sure. Wait, I'm going to get you on the...
I mean, all of this... Do I have to turn this on?
Nope, it should be on.
All of this assumes it's an advantage to have, in some sense, an existing structure. But if you look at the emerging markets, they never built telephone lines because they were already at the point where cellular came in. So is it really our advantage that we have all this old technology that has to transition into new, and we have a lot of political forces to justify the old, such that you don't get the degree of innovation that you need?
Yeah, I mean, that's some of the arguments being made right now that places, even like China, where they're just building their infrastructure out in some places, they don't have to go back to the old technology. They could leapfrog us, and they don't. No, it's a huge issue. It's a huge issue. And it relates back to the policy questions here, that if we're investing so much into increasing demand, let's say, for renewable energy, or at the end of the day, all we're doing is perhaps driving the Chinese solar industry and giving them incentives to build that industry out. And those are, in essence, the types of questions we're trying to get at here at this research project. So let's just mention the policy questions again. So once again, to what extent is public policy influencing innovation and entrepreneurship? A lot of the policies, again, are really aimed at the demand side. So creating a demand for renewable energy with an assumption that if we create the demand, it will filter back into creating innovation and entrepreneurship within those regions. Now, I'm kind of a believer that they'll create demand, or they'll create incentives for innovation and entrepreneurship. It's just not clear to me it will create them in those regions. So you might have Virginia have a renewable energy program that helps feed the Silicon Valley solar and wind industries at the end of the day. But that's an empirical question, and that's what we want to try to capture here with the research we're doing. We have had some just anecdotal evidence that, for example, Iowa has been very aggressive with both, obviously, biofuels and wind, and in fact might be being successful in driving some of the companies to locate there and spend their money on R&D and innovate and create those kind of high-tech jobs that everybody desires. Just recognize that there is, once again, a wide variety of policies being pursued right now. We're going to see a huge one coming up very soon, which these federal stimulus dollars, where we have direct grants for R&D, which I believe is maybe the first time we've ever really done that in the U.S. We've given grants to like national labs and the like, but the idea there'll be direct grants to companies developing these technologies. How will they differ than incentives for tax incentives and the like for installing green technologies? I think there's other policy mechanisms out there that haven't been explored as much that I think could be really fruitful. I always like to mention patenting policy. Don't really see that entering the dialogue, but what if you added additional years onto patents that had a green technology focus to them? Arguably, that should incentivize additional dollars being spent into the green tech sector, maybe gets more of this innovation that we all want than some of these other types of policies. Yes, wait a second. That's all right. Pass that back.
So you mentioned that the government is going to give grants to private companies, yep, corporations to drive this. Does that mean that the government is planning on taking claim on part of the intellectual property like they do with their agencies and their labs?
That is a really interesting question. I don't know the answer to that. I had assumed that they weren't, that these were just kind of seed grants to feed things along. But that's a very, very interesting question. We'll have to look into more detail there. Obviously, one could imagine if they're going to try to hold on to intellectual property, that might suppress some of the incentives to innovate and the like for these firms. The final thing I want to emphasize here in terms of the questions we're asking is one can imagine that the policy mechanisms are going to be moderated by other factors that may be pre-existing conditions, if you will, in different regions. It is true, at least anecdotally, we see a lot of activity in Silicon Valley in the green tech sector now. Now, why is that? Is it because the technology is highly related to their history in terms of silicon technology and in terms of high-tech technology? Maybe. It might be because there's just a rich venture financing community already established there that is feeding dollars into this industry. My colleague Jeff York has a paper where they look at social norms, these kind of squishy social norms, and they actually find some evidence that that seems to generate some of the entrepreneurial activity. It has an effect on entrepreneurial activity. So, for example, one could imagine California is more environmentally green and tree huggers than Mississippi. And controlling for a bunch of different things, just that fact alone seems to be driving some of the entrepreneurial activity. So it's one of the interesting things I think about green tech is clearly there's a business case here being made, and that's driving a lot of the activity. But there's obviously also a social case here as well, and that some of the entrepreneurs moving into this space, they want to make money, but they also want to save the world. And so there's some really interesting dynamics, I think, playing out here in terms of who's getting into this field, what's motivating them, and then once again, you know, kind of where this is happening. All right, so one thing about research, you never go in blind, right? You always have priors, you have beliefs about the way the world works. We call that theory more broadly in academia. We form hypotheses, right? So even before we'll test this, we want to form some hypotheses here about what is driving, in this case, green tech investments in innovation and entrepreneurship. Now, I'm an economist by training, so when I think about this question, my first reaction really goes to economic incentives. So where are the economic incentives for green tech coming from, and do we have some ideas about how they might differentially impact in certain sectors and certain regions? So what I'd like to do is for like the next 10, 15 minutes, just run through some of these. Some of these are pretty obvious. Some of these are areas I've done research in the past, so I just thought to share with maybe some of the insights that I've had from other work that I've done. So the first most obvious one that people think about are consumer preferences. Just simply, consumers are demanding green technology, and that's driving investment and innovation here in this space. A good example, if you look at, for example, method once again, and kind of green cleaning supplies. Clearly, that is pretty much being driven by a consumer demand for these types of products, and they're trying to satisfy that demand. Hybrid vehicles. Premiums of about $4,000 to $5,000 on a Prius or other hybrid vehicles over their comparables. Clearly, people have a higher willingness to pay for a green vehicle versus others. That, once again, consumer preferences. Electrical utilities, electrical demand, it's harder to say there. There are various attempts, you can probably buy through your utility green power and specify that. Utilities in the U.S. and really internationally as well, a little bit odd, right? Because there are these regulated entities here. They might just be passing their costs on to customers. You know, it's not clear that that might be the big driver for green technology at the end of the day, is this kind of huge upswing of consumers saying we want our green energy there. So point once again that, you know, these might vary quite importantly between different sectors, different regions of the world. Europeans historically have seemed, at least over the last 20 years, to have a higher willingness to pay for green goods and services than they have in the U.S. I haven't seen any analysis done of China or India or some more developing economies, but one could imagine that's not a big motivator at all for them, one could imagine. Operational efficiency. So this is just simply the idea that there might be some cost savings here from adopting green technology. There's a long literature, I've participated in it, kind of asking the question, does it pay to be green? And there is, you know, quite a bit of accumulating evidence that at the end of the day, a lot of waste produced by firms is in fact a cost to them at the end of the day. It shows that the resources aren't being utilized to 100%, and it shows that there's maybe some cost associated with just disposal of waste. So as a result, firms who take a look at pollution often find that there are these cost benefits that they receive by trying to lower those pollution levels. The easiest one to think about in terms of what we're talking about today, just energy costs. Right? So if we try to increase the energy efficiency of our plant and operations, it's going to drive down our operating costs. There's a benefit to us there. So this operational efficiency is driving some of the demand, obviously, for green technologies. Government subsidies. Now, clearly, that's one of the things we're focusing on today, is that there's this role of the government to play in subsidizing these technologies and the like. It is interesting. There's a lot of rhetoric out there right now that suggests, you know, solar and wind are not viable industries because without the government incentives, they'd fall apart. There's some, obviously, evidence to suggest that's more or less true, but I saw a really interesting analysis recently that looked at the subsidies for coal and oil and suggested they're about a 10-order magnitude compared to the subsidies for solar and wind. None of these industries are pure. There's lots of incentives out there to encourage development of oil and gas reserves, to subsidize basically public lands for those industries. They're all getting some kind of kickback or subsidy at the end of the day here. They matter, and so we want to see how much they matter and how they matter differentially between different sectors here. All right, government regulation. So I make a distinction here between incentive-based programs, so tax rebates, tax incentives and the like, versus just straight run-of-the-mill regulation here. So in the auto industry, we have the CAFE standards, which require that all auto manufacturers have a certain fleet level, so across all their vehicles, MPG, mile per gallon, for that fleet. If they go under it, then they have to pay a pretty substantial fine and tax for violating that. As we raise CAFE standards, clearly that's creating direct incentives to the auto companies to produce alternative energy vehicles, alternative fuel vehicles. The big one to watch right now in the U.S. is greenhouse gas emissions. So whether or not we will have some type of cap and trade or even a carbon tax on CO2 or greenhouse gas emissions can be a real game changer here. The estimates I've seen from different models suggest, depending, of course, where they put the cap, we could be talking around $30 per ton of carbon emitted in terms of getting permits to allow for you to have those emissions. That can suddenly make a lot of these renewable energy technologies a lot more economically viable if we get that in place. If you ask me my opinion of what's the likelihood of us getting that in the U.S., I was probably more optimistic about a year ago than I am now. Just seeing how the healthcare debate has kind of played out. The energy's next, and I think energy is going to have the same problems, that it's going to die 1,000 deaths as every special interest tries to pick away at the legislation. The devil's in the details with cap and trade. So I don't know if you've looked into this much, but there's issues around, for example, how you initially allocate permits in terms of what you're allowed to emit. That depending on how that's done could really incentivize or disincentivize certain investments to be made. There's huge issues in terms of a cap and trade system with carbon offsets. So one of the things I like about cap and trade is that it creates these direct incentives to offset carbon emissions. You know, simplest idea is you buy a piece of land and you grow a forest on it. The problem is there's this issue of additionality. People have heard of additionality. It's the idea that you have to prove that what you're doing is actually additive to the carbon sink of the world. So here's the challenge. What prevents me from buying a piece of land, cutting all the trees down, selling them, and then turning around and saying, I'm going to grow a forest now. Can you give me credit for growing that forest? All right? So once again, the devil's in the details. Like I said, I'm a little more skeptical now whether we'll actually get a viable piece of legislation out of Congress that puts a cap and trade system in place. But I'm an optimistic guy in general, so I'm kind of keeping my fingers crossed that something will come along there. Finally, I want to just talk about strategic positioning. Once again, strategy professor, so I always try to think in these ways. I think there's some real interesting opportunities here for either entrepreneurs, even established businesses, in the competitive realm as we've seen great technology develop. One of the things we know from studying industry after industry is that when there is a disruption to the core technology of an industry, it often leads to a competitive reordering, basically an upheaval of the existing status quo within an industry. You know, you can go back 100 years. When the automobile came about, it was really detrimental to the existing horse and buggy manufacturers, right? A few of them made the transition, but a lot of them failed. I think we can make the argument that this is happening in a number of important sectors. Automobiles. You know, for 100 years we've had the internal combustion engine, and now we're experimenting with some, I think, pretty radical technologies at the end of the day. General Motors talks about the sled design. Have people heard of the sled design from General Motors? The idea basically, as we move to electric vehicles, plug-in hybrids, fuel cell vehicles, you're going to begin to have electric motors on each wheel, so an independent electric motor on each wheel. And you're going to be able to put, in essence, the entire drivetrain, like this stack of electrical batteries or fuel cells, in about a 15 to 18-inch sled. So you have this basically base car that's a sled, the whole drivetrain's in there, and there's a wire coming out. They call it drive-by-wire. So everything will be electronic controls of those four wheels. There's actually some real cool performance benefits because now you've got independent suspension, you've got fast acceleration. These are going to be cool cars when they come about. From a strategy perspective, though, putting my strategy hat on, I'm thinking vertical disintegration within the auto industry. That you're going to end up buying a platform from some Chinese manufacturer that's going to drive down the cost of these, and then you're going to go to a German design house or an Italian design house to buy whatever car you want, body of the car, to sit on top of the sled. Because that's the basic idea, that you can just basically, any design you want, you just plop it down on top of this sled design here. Radically restructure the industry if something like this came about. So once again, I'm on record many times now making the prediction within 10 years, I think we'll be talking about an auto company in the U.S. that we don't know of yet. We don't know, once again, two guys in their garage coming up with something. It is not uncommon when we see this kind of technology shift for this to occur. Take the oil industry. British Petroleum, Exxon, Shell, they've all been heavily making investments into renewable energy, though all of them are really a small percentage of overall what they do. At the end of the day, is it really they who are going to make the transition to renewable energy? Does BP have any inherent skill in doing wind or solar at the end of the day? Does their current technology, which is really extracting oil from the ground, refining it, shipping it around the world, is that really going to lead them to be successful? You can tell I'm a little skeptical about whether they're going to make that transition or not. So once again, the kind of strategic implications of green tech can be quite substantial, lead to restructuring of industries. From an entrepreneurial standpoint, from an investment standpoint, I think it opens up great opportunities. Now's the time that you're going to see kind of entrants coming in, restructuring industries, making inroads that they might not have otherwise been able to. Any questions at this point? Yeah. Actually, let me give you the right behind you.
So when you guys are looking at kind of what the drivers of innovation are and where it's happening, are you just focusing on the U.S. or are you looking worldwide?
We're going to be global. We're trying to collect data globally here. And I'll talk about it in a second, but we're trying to do an analysis at both the country level and then the state level within the U.S. Because we have variance in policies at both, so we can really look at both at the same time.
Okay, and then are you going to basically do it by sector? So, for instance, take solar and then look at what the policies are by different countries and then find out how that's driving innovation in different areas, manufacturing, development and all that across countries and do like kind of baseline comparison?
Yeah, I mean, once again, strategy, we tend to think of industries. And here, when you talk about green tech, it's less of an industry than it is a collection of different industries. So that is exactly our strategy. So we're going to, we're looking at solar, we're looking at wind, we're looking at biofuels. Eventually, we hope to get to, water, we hope to get to green chemistry and the like. But yeah, to keep an industry lens on these at the end of the day. There's obviously some interactions between them, but I think it's just the most fruitful way. That's a good segue, actually, into kind of our approach here. So what are we doing now? Like I said, I apologize. I don't have great answers to these questions for you today, but I can at least share with you what we're currently working on. One of the first things we're doing is just simply building industry life cycles, trying to figure out, who's entering the industry and at what time and what type of firm they are. Academics, we like to come up with complicated words for simple concepts. So we use the terms de novo and dialio. We got to use a little Latin here. To represent basically, de novo would be new entrants, like true new ventures that are entering into an industry, where dialio refers to diversifiers, firms that are moving into the industry who are already large established players. So who enters when? Is it going to be the large big firms who enter fast? Well, historically, we've often seen it's the entrepreneurs who first enter a sector, and it's the larger firms who kind of come in later. And it's an open question whether the larger established firms will be able to kind of take over the industry or not. So in part, we're looking at things like what are the dominant technologies being adopted and used, when are technologies kind of being put aside, when are they kind of taking off. Looking, once again, at this vertical position of players. Where are they putting themselves in the value chain? Are they outsourcing manufacturing? Are they doing manufacturing in-house and the like? And then with an eye to consolidation and shakeout. One of the features we've seen at new industries is this pattern over and over again where there's massive entry into the industry, lots of different firms playing the industry. A competitive shakeout occurs where we get then either mergers and acquisitions, reducing the number of competitors, or just simply firms going out of business. And then you typically get a stabler set of smaller number of firms left in the industry. The auto industry 100 years ago, around 1910 or so, there was literally 100 different auto manufacturers in the U.S. By like 1920, there was basically the big three. A few more were kind of lingering on there. So this is a common feature of industries that we see. So we want to try to capture that as this industry evolves. So I wouldn't be surprised if, for example, we'll see lots of entry into solar, lots of entry into wind, and then there'll be this competitive shakeout with a few big players left standing. One of the things we're collecting data on is exactly green tech innovation and entrepreneurship, and we have a number of ways we're trying to do that. One is we're using patenting data. So in my world, kind of the economics of innovation, patenting data is our best currency that we have as kind of a way to measure innovation. We're working with a company here in Charlottesville called MCAM to help categorize and sum these patents across different sectors. So going back to this idea that geographically we're going to see variance, we want to build maps like the following here. So you might see for solar, there's a whole bunch of activity going on in Silicon Valley, maybe some in Arizona, maybe some in Boston, the Route 128 corridor, maybe it varies for wind and biofuel. Let me just give the caveat here that this is totally made up, by the way. I just did this yesterday. So this is what we're trying to get to, okay? So I have no idea actually how this is going to pan out. But yeah, see how the priors come out. That'd be a good idea. See if I map anywhere close to what the reality is here. For these different sectors. But that's kind of what we're trying to build here is this notion of where is innovation actually taking place? Who's getting patents in these various sectors? Yes?
So what else are you looking at besides patents? Because in your introduction you talked about how these technologies may not lend themselves to patents.
Yes. So one of the other things we're looking at is actually entrepreneurial startups as another metric here. So there's data by a database called Venture Expert that summarizes every venture financing fund, basically. And so it gives us a vehicle for looking at, well, where are the new firms coming from in these different sectors? Once again, we'll look to see where their home base is. So an interesting question would be, if the government gives a bunch of money to Lawrence Livermore National Labs, does that seem to then spur a bunch of entrepreneurial spin-offs that kind of come out of that research from that federal lab? And so looking at the actual startups is one way of getting at that. Another little part of this project is specific to the green building industry. We found these source books that they have for the industry. Basically, if you're a builder or a general contractor, these Bibles, if you will, have all the different green builders in there. And it's really fascinating to look at because there's some that are like green roof tile, green wallboard. I mean, you name it. You can get green toilets. They're in there. And these source books go back to 2000, so we have them every year, and we actually can then see, well, who's offering green products and services to the building industry over time and kind of get some measure of entrepreneurial entry and change in players through this data. So, you know, I'm basically, you know, opportunistic when it comes to data. Whenever we can find something that's useful, we try to grab it and measure it.
So along those lines, do you ever look back and see, you know, in the case of public policy, what mix of subsidies, tax rebates, you know, sales tax increases or whatever have worked at spurring entrepreneurship and innovation in the past?
Yeah, you know, in fact, maybe the dirty little secret about a lot of academic research is that we typically are looking back, right, because that's where we can get the data. So all of these cases, we're building what we call panels, which means we're looking year by year back into history as much as we can. So for the green patents, for example, we can go back to the 70s. So we can get data on, you know, back to the kind of the first energy crisis and energy boom back in the 70s and have data there. So yeah, the more we can do that, the more data we can get from the past, the more we can do analyses that allow us to tease some of this stuff out. What we have actually a harder time doing is things that are happening right now, today, because we just don't have enough data to assess that at this point. So have you guys done regression analysis? How many of you have done regression analysis now? First years too? Okay, great. So in the language of regression analysis, these in essence are our dependent variables. Okay, so these are our dependent variables. We're going to try to predict and model, you know, where these patterns are happening. Typically, like I say, a geographic region is where we're first going to take our cut here. In terms of our independent variables, not surprisingly, we're going to collect a bunch of data on government incentive programs. And fortunate for us, there's actually a number of sources of these data out there now that we can collect on things like federal level policies across countries, state level policies. Obviously, I shared with some of you some of that data already. Using these as a vehicle, once again, to kind of predict where we see innovation and entrepreneurship. We also want to collect data on other types of drivers that I was mentioning before, trying to characterize this idea of the radicalness of underlying technology. So in some industries, once again, I would predict that the underlying shift to green technology is not that fundamentally different than the existing technology, in which case we would expect established firms to basically start offering green products. In other industries, it does represent a radical shift, in which case I wouldn't be surprised to see entrepreneurial entrants making headway and gaining ground within those industries. Other capabilities, so sales and manufacturing. We've mentioned this briefly before, but let me just give you some data to kind of highlight this. The blue, the solid color here, represents megawatts installed of wind turbines. So not surprisingly, there's a lot going on in the middle of the country, some going on in the northeast, almost nothing in the southeast part of the country in terms of demand for wind power. The dots represent manufacturing facilities for wind power and for wind turbines. So interestingly, while there's almost no demand, if you will, in the southeast United States, there's a lot of manufacturing of wind turbines taking place. Now for our purposes, we want to help use this to think about innovation. Is it in fact the case that there's a lot of manufacturing going on in South Carolina? Has that led to subsequent innovation there as well? Do we see patents being filed in South Carolina? Or once again, is it that Silicon Valley is generating all the technology, they're contracting out to South Carolina to manufacture it, to sell it and install it in Texas? And where this is important, again, is we think about policy implications. Typically, I'm sure the governor of South Carolina is saying, we're going to be the next Silicon Valley of wind here. We're going to encourage people to locate their manufacturing. Not exactly clear to me if that's the types of jobs they're going to create. It might be more kind of run-of-the-mill industrial manufacturing jobs that they're creating at the end of the day. Some other things we're going to look at, venture financing, once again, as perhaps a latent capability within a certain area. One would think that venture financing would be available, it would be kind of across borders and not constrained at all. But a lot of the evidence tends to find that venture financing tends to be rather local. You're in Silicon Valley, you give to other Silicon Valley entrepreneurs. You're in Boston 128, you kind of stick to there. And a lot of it, I guess, because the VC industry is about making relationships and networking and the like, that requires you to be somewhat local there. So that might influence it. And then these social norms, again, your kind of overall consumer demand. We have this great data from the League of Conservation Voters, where basically every congressional district, they have a score associated with them based on how they voted on green issues. And so you can characterize states or even local municipalities as being more green than others. Right? So once again, I imagine California scores high, Mississippi probably scores low on some of these metrics. What we do at the end of the day is we formulate and estimate regression models. And just to give you a flavor of that, this is actually some work with, just throw up some numbers that are real small and hard for you guys to read. This is a project that actually I have with Jeff York that kind of relates to some of the green tech stuff. It's a slightly different question. Here we're looking at LEED certification. Have people heard of LEED? Okay, almost everybody. Great. So green building certifications here. We have data that has aggregated those LEED certifications up by state and by year. And we're interested in kind of what drives more LEED certifications in one state versus another. So we're looking at things like state policy. So there are incentives not only for renewable energy, there's incentives for LEED certification in a lot of states. So we look at that. And we also look at green suppliers, which is one of our kind of areas of interest here, is our argument that we make, and really what's borne out by the data, is that a state policy in and of itself is insufficient to cause increases in LEED certification. That in fact you need a robust supplier market to make it viable. So in other words, I might want to build green, but if I can't get the subcontractors who know how to build green and have the supply to build green, I just can't do it, and then therefore I can't get my green certification from LEED. So not going through the numbers in any detail here, what we see is in fact a heavy influence of green building suppliers on certification, and that policy when combined with green building membership or green suppliers actually increases the effectiveness of those green suppliers of the policy. Yes?
Do you think that many companies don't know that they can like create a LEED building instead of a regular building with just a little bit of spread on top? Because this was one of the arguments that like this summer I worked for DuPont for the biotech division, and they have a LEED building, and they explain to like the interns that the process to get to have a LEED building for them was a struggle because at the beginning they were not aware of what is LEED. So maybe it's like awareness the problem.
Yeah, I've heard the argument that it's not that hard to get the baseline LEED certification. Now there's different levels. There's silver, gold, platinum, and to get the higher ones actually takes quite a bit that you have to do. So you're right, it might be partly an educational story here that's just kind of diffusing knowledge about getting LEED certification. It could be an incentive story, that as everybody gets LEED certification, is there much additional bonus in getting LEED certification at that point, or maybe higher level certifications. And once again, that's kind of what we're exploring here. I could go into more detail. That equation at the top isn't exactly correct because we have a limited dependent variable, account variable, and LEED certification, so we're running a negative binomial model. Did you teach any of this? Did you guys get to that part in regression analysis yet? This is the fun stuff that we do, though. We build models, we estimate here, we try to figure out marginal effects of these different types of interventions here. And that's what we're going to end up doing with the work here. So what are our outputs at the end of the day? I view it as one of the outputs is just putting this data together. Just the descriptive data that comes out of this, I hope, will be impactful. We'll at least create one batting briefing on green tech sector. I'm hoping that we might even have more that come out of this. These are, once again, reports that the Batten Institute will put out to the general public highlighting some of our findings. And then, of course, this currency, again, of peer-reviewed journal articles. And I imagine there'll be a number of articles that will come out of this effort. The time frames are different on these. The Batten briefings we might get out hopefully within the next 6-7 months. The peer-reviewed journal articles will take years. And that's just the way the process works for us academics. So when you see a stressed out, non-tenured faculty member, it's usually because they're really worrying about whether their publications are going to hit in time before they come up with tenure. So some insights here. What we're trying to do is speak both, once again, to firm strategy and public policy. What segments are most attractive? How should you position yourself? I like the term non-market strategy, a strategy. People use that to refer to all those things that kind of don't fit in your traditional strategy toolkit. This would include things like lobbying government. Right? So, what should you, if you were going to lobby, what should you be lobbying for? Should you be lobbying for a cap and trade? Should you be lobbying for a tax incentive? What works best for your firm, given what we know? And then, of course, to speak to public policy as well here. So, what policies are going to best lead to advancement of this industry? What types of jobs are being created? Where are they being created? Obviously, these are really important questions that we want to try to have a voice